HOA sells a non-HOA house, posted by Catfish21SM. I'll spare you the boring details, but we lived in a small rural farming community that's been growing quite rapidly lately. A lot of the farmers are growing old and selling their farmland. There are two ways to do this. They can either split it into lots and sell a piece at a time, and this typically brings in more money but is a much slower process. Then they can sell the whole thing at once. Again, faster process, less money. This particular farmer decided to sell his land in lots because it was in a developing neighborhood and he could make a much larger profit doing it that way. My friend bought a few lots and built a very nice house on it. Then a large company came in and bought most all of the remaining lots and built a subdivision on the land. In order to keep everything in a consistent look, they themed the properties after my friend's place. His was a lot nicer, obviously. I mean, he didn't cheap out on it like they did, but they had similar styles to his. He didn't mind because that just raised his property value even more. Now, it's important to note that my friend who this is about basically lived right in the center of the subdivision. He bought a place in the middle of the property because of its view. Probably not the best idea in retrospect. So the people who built the subdivision, they also founded an HOA. My friend was invited to join on multiple occasions, but always refused for obvious reasons. Because of some legal clauses about pre-existing properties, he wasn't required to join, even though he was in, well, the center of the subdivision. He did maintain a pretty good relationship with the HOA president and some of the members of the community as well. He was regularly invited to HOA events and sometimes actually took them up on the offer. He enjoyed it. But then, a new president took over the HOA. I guess this new president didn't really do any research because he just assumed that my friend was part of the HOA. He contacted my friend about several violations that he noticed, along with late fees due to the HOA. When my friend tried to explain that he was not part of the HOA, the new president just shooed him off and ignored him. My friend obviously just ignored all of the fees and all the fines and so on. Now, my friend was a winter bird. For anybody who doesn't know what that means, it's a fancy way of saying that someone that lives in the south during the winter and in the north during the summer. They typically own two houses, or sometimes they're just retired and they jump around between family members that are happy to take care of them for that time. My friend in particular was a doctor who worked for a hospital here in the summer months and a hospital in the south in the winter months, so it all worked out. So saying this, you could probably imagine the horror on his face when he came home and found all of his locks changed and another family living in his house. The HOA president knew that he traveled south every year, so he waited until he was gone, then sent an eviction notice for all of his being late, and he had a friend that owned a realty firm and they sold the house and moved in a new family, all while my friend was gone. My friend contacted a lawyer friend of his from back in the south and they started the process of suing the HOA. Big city lawyer versus small town HOA who was absolutely in the wrong. Guess who won? Oh yeah, and did I mention that the family that moved into my friend's house, they joined in as well. They also sued the HOA because they had to be relocated on short notice and they had taken out a very hefty loan for that property. Now, I don't know exactly what happened, but I do know that the HOA president lost his house and he skipped town. I'm guessing he probably took the brunt of the attack. I'll keep the details as vague as possible because I'm still with this organization. I work for a government department. We have offices and locations all over the state. I'm based out of a city that's about a 2.5-hour train ride to our head office. At the time, I was working in a team that had members working remotely all across the state, looking after policy, process, and quality assurance. Our old manager had gone and gotten himself promoted for being genuinely brilliant at his role. So our new manager, Steve, was hired in from the glorious world of banking, and he was here to whip us lazy public servants into shape. A few days after he began his role, he called us all to a teleconference to inform us that he wanted all of us to be at the head office 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for an all-day in-person team meeting. He wanted to see us in meet space to size us up, understanding what we were doing, and see where we weren't keeping up with the private sector. As I mentioned, due to the nature of the work we were doing, we were all across the state. So, in person, whole team meetings were rare, and if they occurred at all, they were booked weeks in advance. We were all adept at video conferencing long before COVID. Some of us tried to tell our new high-flyer manager that almost none of us were in the same city as him, and to be there on such short notice would mean travel expenses, meal allowances, overtime, and blah blah. He didn't seem to care, and told us in no uncertain terms to just be at the head office tomorrow at 8 a.m. before abruptly hanging up. Now, I should explain something. I'm one of a handful of union delegates in our department. I know our award back to front, specifically the sections dealing with travel, allowances, and overtime. So I engaged in malicious compliance mode. If Steve wanted us there, fine, but it'll cost him. So I quickly went about emailing my team what Steve had done by requiring us to be in the head office at 8 a.m. and what to do. Because we'd have to travel outside our normal work hours, our workday clock started ticking the moment we left our homes and only stopped once we got home. Some of our team traveled overnight. They were entitled to overtime to travel, a dinner allowance, and accommodation for the night, and the same returning. As someone traveling in the morning before 7 a.m., I was entitled to a breakfast allowance, lunch allowance, and if I got home after 9 p.m., a dinner allowance also. So I left my house at 5 a.m. to catch the only train that would get me there in time. The train was running slightly behind, but I made it in time. So my first 3 hours of my workday down, and I'd done no work. After a brief period of us introducing ourselves to Steve, he proceeded to spend the next 4 hours telling us about all of the things he did at the bank, how he made so much money for them, where they'd sent him as a holiday bonus, how we're all stuck in the past in the public service. The work he'd seen wasn't up to private sector standards and blah 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 blah. He had all the cocksureness of a finance bro who had always failed upwards because others had picked up his slack. By 3 p.m., my entire team were into overtime pay territory, and Steve was just warming up with his non-charm offensive. Another 3 hours goes by with Steve verbally patting himself on the back, deeply in love hearing his own voice, but all I hear is cha-ching, cha-ching. Steve decided that 5 p.m. was a good time to finish up. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at his watch, and unceremoniously said, "That's all for today, go home now," and walked out. After I and a few others gave a few awkward shrugs to each other, we all packed up and started to make our separate ways home after doing no work all day. I, myself, got to the train station pretty quickly, and I saw a train was leaving soon that would get me home around 8 p.m. Or I could catch the all stations train and get home closer to 9:30 p.m. You know what? No matter how fast I could run, I just couldn't catch that earlier train. Darn, I just have to catch that all stations train and be on the clock for another hour and a half, plus have my dinner paid for. Such rotten luck. I submitted my claims the next day, 4.5 hours at double rate, my train tickets, my taxi fares to and from the train station, my breakfast, lunch, and dinner allowances. For me alone, it was close to a $500 expense claim. The rest of my team followed suit and ensured they claimed everything too. Steve tried to fight us on approval for the claims, but quickly learned that, unlike in the world of banking, most public servants are union, and we'd raise living heck if he denied our award guaranteed allowances. His all-day Steve Fest symposium blew a good $6,000 hole in his budget. Needless to say, while Steve was our manager, he never required us to attend an in-person meeting again. Video conferencing was just fine. He only lasted 6 months before leaving for new opportunities. He just went back to his old job at the bank. Guess he was the one who couldn't keep up. Many years ago, I worked at a place with lots of arcade games and pizza, similar to Chuck E. Cheese. I was hired to do maintenance, repair, and setup of those arcade machines. There was already someone there doing this, but they were never allowed to work more than 40 hours a week, and the place was open 7 days a week, 9 hours a day. So that's 63 hours a week, not including prep for opening and cleanup after closing. At the end of my first shift, I was told that I also was expected to help with cleanup, since everyone that worked close had to help with cleanup. All my shifts were close shifts. This meant that I had less time before my morning classes than I expected when taking the job, but a few extra bucks was valuable to a starving college student. Fast forward about 2 months. New manager, fresh out of high school, gets his big boy boots on and starts making rules. First rule: a schedule with everyone's hours for the next week would be posted by Friday morning. Second rule: you must clock in before your posted shift start time, but not more than 5 minutes before your shift. Third rule: you must clock out at the end of your posted shift end time, no more than 5 minutes after. At the end of my first shift after these rules were created, I clocked out and left everyone else to do the cleanup. To be clear, it's not like I was getting time and a half overtime or anything. All I expected was to be paid my normal rate, and they didn't even want to pay even that, so I clocked out and left. At the beginning of my next shift, they were angry. They expected me to clock out and then work over an hour for free, every single shift. Now, these were only 5-hour shifts too. I refused. The next week, they posted a new schedule with my shift ending an hour later. Since everyone saw the list, they all got mad. I guess they were all just fine with wage theft until one person refused. The next week, everyone had an extra hour on their shifts, and at this point, his wage theft scheme had failed. Fast forward a couple weeks, and this new manager doesn't come in on Thursday. He doesn't come in until Monday. No schedule is posted. Monday afternoon, I go in to get my check, and I say, "See you next week." I'm told my shift started half an hour ago. I say that I made plans since I wasn't on the schedule. Well, no schedule means that I couldn't be on it. The manager points to a schedule posted on the wall, printed just hours before, after some of the shifts on it had already started. I thanked him for posting next week's schedule early and started to leave. Then I was threatened with termination, but I kept walking. I came back a week later and talked with the daytime guy doing the same job. He said it was a bad week. Many machines were down, and he was walking around with like $100 in tokens because he was spending much of his time giving refunds, to the point that he didn't have enough uninterrupted time to make any repairs. He was also keeping a roll of masking tape with him to tape over the coin slots as the machines failed. This meant a lot more use on the remaining machines, which started to show it quickly. I go to clock in and was told that I had been fired. I smiled and walked out. I spoke with the daytime guy a while later. Apparently, they never filled my position. People working with mechanical and electrical knowledge willing to work minimum wage are rare. Instead, he was getting 14 hours a week in time and a half overtime, with a base pay almost twice what I was getting. This extra expense came out of the department budget, which also paid for replacement parts. Even before this, it was never enough to buy parts. This from the department budget thing was from the same manager. He didn't want normal payroll to go up. For a while, basically everyone was carrying around $20 in tokens to give refunds, but all the comps were unacceptable to the manager, so now only the sales desk could issue refunds, which meant that ordering pizza took forever, and many people just left angry rather than waiting for a refund. Most machines had tape over the token slots. This backup at the sales desk didn't last long, as few people were coming and no one was booking parties anymore. Other than staff, it was basically empty. It didn't even smell like pizza anymore. With no customers, the daytime guy finally had time to make repairs, but didn't have the parts to do most repairs. As far as I know, that manager stayed there until the place went under about 8 months after I was fired for not working a shift that his own rules said that I couldn't work. There was a previous manager that wasn't great, but wasn't trying to wage theft or any of that mess. Generally, things worked out pretty smoothly under her, and there was a long waiting list for booking parties. She was let go as soon as this guy graduated. I don't know why, but I assume nepotism. I could be wrong about that. Maybe she was doing something that got her fired, but if that was the case, then there were at least 10 people that were more qualified for the job. I never met the owner or even knew his or her name. Now, it was entirely possible to clock in or out more than 5 minutes outside of your scheduled shift. You just wouldn't be paid for that time. Everyone that stayed late clocked out late, and I'm pretty sure none of them got paid for that extra time. I know I clocked out late a few times and I didn't get paid for the extra time. I worked the closing shift on Sunday before the Monday that I walked out, and the previous week's schedule was still posted at that time, and I had not been scheduled to work on Monday or Tuesday of that week. I even asked the woman running the show that night about the new schedule, and she didn't know, but assumed that we were just following the previous schedule. No one called me after the new schedule was posted. I was in the middle of a school-related project and only stopped by to get my check, deposit it, and get back to the project. If he hadn't tried to force me to work that day, I probably would have worked the schedule from the previous week. But him being a bully made me follow his rules to the letter. Now, even if I was in the wrong to take the week off, he should have been painfully aware what happened when I was gone for a whole week. Firing me when I was about to start working on cleaning up the mess that he started was next level incompetence. The daytime guy, he was no moron, but he also didn't really understand a lot of the machines. When I started, I'd been repairing electronics as a part-time job and hobby for years, and finding and replacing a single bad part on a $500 plus arcade board was usually pretty easy for me. Sometimes the repairs looked insane because I had to work with what I could find at Radio Shack, but they worked. The daytime guy was great with mechanical stuff, but when I started, the soldering iron was in a dust-covered box because he'd basically never touched it. He didn't even have the correct type of solder. He had stuff meant for plumbing repairs. When I left, cheap board-level repairs turned into expensive board replacements that there was no budget for. Before I got there, this wasn't a big issue because previous management always allocated extra money rather than having a machine just remain dead. New manager did not do this. Not sure why, but if I had to guess, it's because he didn't want to explain why these expensive board replacements stopped and started again perfectly in line with my time there. Someone else was obviously watching the books, or else he wouldn't have played games with how to pay a daytime guy all that overtime. Don't let your kid have consequences. Okay, posted by Senior Motor 2647. So I'm a 23-year-old female nanny. For the family I work for, there are 7 kids. Yes, 7. All ranging from 14 years old to 10 months old. I've been working for them for about 8 months, and I've never really had an issue. They're a good family, for the most part. A key part here is all the kids are homeschooled, so they don't really get out a lot. Unfortunately, that leads to mom and dad spoiling them quite a lot. And since I've started, I've had quite a bit of a discipline issue. They throw tantrums, throw things, and they scream a lot. Finally, mom recently put on discipline because their tantrums led me to getting an injury. I was pushed down the stairs. So she implemented a timeout routine. It was going well for almost everyone. So here is where the story truly begins. The second to youngest is 2.5, almost 3. His tantrums are some of the worst, and instead of really disciplining him, she coddles him. If he screams and yells, she just picks him up and gives him whatever he wants. He will also throw things and hit whoever is telling him no, and mom doesn't do anything. On Wednesday this week, mom had an appointment, and when he woke up from his nap and she wasn't there, he freaked out. I tried to calm him by playing games, food, or reading books, but nothing worked. He just got louder and more aggressive. He even hit me and his siblings. Eventually, he woke the baby, and when I got her, he tried to even hurt her. So, with no other real options working to calm him down, I pick him up, sit him on his bed, and said, "Time out. You do not behave this way. When you calm down, you can come out." He finally is calming down after several minutes, and mom comes home. Oh, she was quite upset that he got a timeout because she says that he's too young and he doesn't know any better. Now, I understand that he is young, but I've been a nanny for a while and I've learned that 2 or 3 is a normal age for discipline, so they learn to know better. I only do a minute per year age, and it only goes longer if they can't calm down, though I check in every minute. She was also upset that I used his room as a timeout. Now that part I can get, and hey, I can understand that at this age, associating timeout with where he sleeps, I can agree that we don't do that. But I had to ask, when he's acting like this, what do you want me to do? She said, let me handle it. If I'm not there, give him what he wants, it's not worth the fight. Okay, but what if it's something I can't give? She replied, if you can't just let him go through it, he'll calm down quickly. I looked at her like, are you serious? You do realize how he can be, right? But okay. Cue malicious compliance. The next day, mom had another appointment and she was gone when he woke up. And of course, he wanted her and only her. I said, sorry, she's not here. Why don't we play a game? He screams, no. I ask, "You want a snack?" "No," he screams and starts slapping at my hands. I ask to go read a book or go to his sibling's room for playtime. He screams again and he hits me in the face. I told him, "Please don't hit me." So he screams in my face and goes off throwing things at me and everyone around and just goes off. I tell everyone to go to their rooms. I tried everything to calm him down and it didn't work. So I did exactly what she told me. Absolutely nothing. He continues his tirade, throwing things, pulling things off shelves, and screaming. I obviously kept him from things that would hurt him, like glass and ceramics, and when he got on a table to push something, I picked him up and put him down, though he did bite me really hard when I did that. Not enough to bleed, but enough to leave a good mark. I let this go for about 15-ish minutes until Mom came home, and when she did, he was still freaking out. She just goes, "What's going on?" And I explained the situation and told her that, hey, I'm just doing what she said and letting him cry it out till he calms down. She said, "That's not what I meant." And I asked, "What do you want?" She didn't really have an answer, so I told her I couldn't use discipline and I couldn't calm him, so you said just to let him go, he'd calm down, and he hasn't yet. I made sure that anything dangerous was taken away, but I didn't know what else I could do. Now, respectively, I could have picked up what he threw around, but I wanted her to see what he was capable of, and I wasn't going to risk getting hurt again from taking his things away. She looked upset, but didn't say anything and just looked at him still throwing his tantrum. The baby wakes up and she goes to get her. When she comes back to try and calm him, he screams to pick him up and he hits her and keeps going till she puts the crying baby on the ground and picks him up. I was kind of shocked that she fed into it. I told her that he's old enough to know what he's doing. He knows that he'll get what he wants when he does these things, and it's only going to get worse. And if it's going to continue, I'm going to continue to do nothing because I won't risk getting hurt or the other kids in the process. I showed her my bite mark, and she went pale a bit and said, he did that? And I said, yes, he did. She took a breath and said, "Why don't you go home for the day and I'll talk to Dad about this." When I came to work this morning, there was a timeout chair for him and I'm allowed to use it at my discretion. Now, so I will say that because I told in the comments I only get paid $22 an hour and it is low, I am quitting this job soon. Or rather, I already did. My last week is in May. I promised I'd stay till then, and then I have a much better paying job backed up. And yes, I did get extra pay for the stairs incident. Not the bite, but yes, for the stairs. HOA story time. You need to follow the law. Okay, no problem. By Unintegrity. I live in an apartment block in Europe with about 100 apartments in total. Every year, we have an election for what could be compared to an American HOA, where we elect a president and a couple of board members to manage the general expenses and the daily maintenance tasks, like fixing the garage port, cleaning the common areas, security cameras, and so on. While we do have a rule book of sorts, nobody in the board has ever been too bothered by neighbors going their own way, as long as there's no complaints. I am the president of this HOA as of today, and I have had my fair share of interesting neighbors, but this one takes the cake. He bought a fancy Tesla, which he made an effort to flash around the neighbors, kinda condescending on how useless old cars are, how we live in the past. Thing is, we don't have a charging station in the garage, so he has to go to the gas station to fill up the battery. There was no charger when he came in, so that shouldn't come as a surprise here. But as soon as he got the car, he started pestering the board, asking about the EV charger. We need to keep up with the modern times, you know? We repeatedly answered that it's in our plans and that we would love to get him on board to help us, as he was the main interested person for the task. This should make the process much more efficient. He never responded to the invitation to join and to help. There's even a small payment for the board members, and we are slammed with other higher priority tasks that have suddenly popped up, like fire alarm upgrades, changing parts of the sprinklers, and so on, so we really cannot use much time in EV charging, although we all agree that we have to get that going. Suddenly, I got a phone call from an electrician reading from the law that we cannot deny an EV charger in the garage and that he would come the following week at our earliest convenience. I just asked him for some time to read the law and make sure that we were on the same page, and in the conversation, he slipped the name of the person who had ordered the charger. To no surprise, it was a Tesla man. There are others with EVs in the garage, and we have a fluent communication with them about this matter. They prefer to wait and then work on the case, which is fine by me. So I reread all the laws and our internal regulations to make sure that we were following everything to the letter. It turns out that the law forces an HOA to facilitate the infrastructure for EV charging, not the stations themselves, as long as there is not a force majeure reading against it, like economical reasons. And our internal regulations state that changing essential infrastructure of the building needs to be done under the approval of the General Assembly, which happens once a year. I talked to our finance manager, and he argued strongly against such an expense without getting a loan to partially finance it, as it would destabilize the economy of the community. With all that, we decided to comply with the regulations fully. We won't decide on any structural changes on the building until the next General Assembly. We need a person dedicated to following the steps of finding providers, comparing offers, and presenting them first to the board, and then to the rest of the neighbors. This also includes safety measurements for the upgraded infrastructure. Once we have a budget, we will find bank offers for the loan that we will have to take most likely, and then we need to hire a lawyer to update the rulebook to account for the use of chargers in the garage. As steps 1 and 3 are dependent on the General Assemblies, the process will inevitably be prolonged in time, and we know that the neighbors are generally against taking up a loan that will increase their monthly cost. So he will have to fight an uphill battle for being a pain in the butt. The best part of this is that before all this happened, we were considering setting a temporary charging station for everyone, instead of the ideal solution of everyone being free to set their charger on the spot. That would not require a loan and was planned to be done during 2022. Now, we will have to ask the Assembly if this is an interesting way forward and abide by the response. I feel bad for the EV owners because when the Tesla guy invoked the rules, the game changed and now they have to wait for all the official process instead of having a temporary, just A-OK solution while we got the rest in place. Do you agree with Mr. HOA President here, or is he in the wrong? Let me know. Cut down the trees, let me move my bins so you can look at them. Posted by Wild A Guess. Hopefully this is a short tale. So we have new neighbors and they seem to be awful. They moved in 5 days ago and for 4 days did nothing but chainsaw down all the trees and bushes on their land. All this greenery is about 40 years old. They also parked all over the place, blocking access for other neighbors. These aren't big houses, but it's a very leafy green place with trees everywhere. We live in a subsidence area and the trees drink a lot of water, preventing runoff, and they help keep the water table down a bit. I know this because a few years ago, their house developed a large crack due to subsidence, and I spent a lot of time talking to the previous owners about it. Turns out, there are French drains under most of the houses here to manage the water. So, I went and I introduced myself very politely and explained the drainage and subsidence problem and asked them to leave up the trees at the front that divide our houses. Not only do they help with the drainage, but they give a nice privacy barrier. I can't see them and they can't see me. I come home later in the day and they've cut the lot down and there's just bare earth and a huge hole in the greenery. The petty revenge. Yesterday, my wife comes in with a huge smile on her face and she's moved the bins up to where the hole is, but still on our path. They could be looking at trees and bushes, but now they get a glorious view of my recycling, waste, and garden bins from their front door and living room window. For context, this is UK based, not in an HOA or other madness. We live in a conservation area, but our trees don't qualify for preservation orders. Even more pettiness in the comments. To make sure they get a constant waft of fauted breeze is a simple trick, assuming one has wheelie bins here and the prevailing wind is in their direction. Grab yourself a clothes peg, remove the spring, paint the jerk as close to the color of the bin, and slide it under the lid enough to get enough of a gap but still look closed from a distance. That is quality pettiness. Honestly, these neighbors probably won't care if they're that kind of person, but you know what? It feels good to be able to get back at them that way. Funny job, OP and wife. Can't remove the charge? Well, I'll just use it then. Posted by eGrant03. In the early 2000s, when I first moved out on my own, I rented from a complex that charged you for assigned parking. It was an upcharge of $25 a month. If you didn't get assigned parking, you would have to fight for a space on the street. My apartment was in the back of the complex, and I was getting over a recent knee and ankle injury, so I opted for paid parking that was relatively close to my front door. My car was a junker, 3 years older than I am, but it ran semi-okay, and the heater worked. As a newly minted adult, well, I was happy to have it. About 3 months into my lease, my car went to the great scrap heap in the sky. I had gotten used to the local transit system and discovered a nearby store would drop off groceries for me. This was long before Walmart and other stores started doing it, so it was cheaper than figuring out a month's supply on the bus. So I opted not to replace my car and utilize the bus pass that my work reimbursed me for. I went to my leasing office and told them that I no longer needed the space and would you please remove the extra charge from my bill. The manager at the desk was new and had never been asked that before. She promised to look into it and let me know. I was naive and I figured it would be gone come next month. Nope, it was still there. I paid all but the parking space and called up the complex. Same girl. She said she was awaiting word from higher ups and offered me a credit for the charge as a one-time courtesy. I reminded her that I no longer owned a car. I hadn't just changed my mind. I told her that the space had been empty for close to a month now and that I won't be utilizing it. She said she understood loud and clear and would get it sorted by next month. 3 days before rent was due, she finally got back to me. Apparently, it was in my lease and couldn't be removed without breaking the lease and signing a new one. Even if I didn't move out, the lease breaking and initiation fees would be charged to me, and my rent would go up to the new current market value. This would be over $1,000, so it's not an option for someone freshly on their own. I kept the parking space on the lease. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing my lease to get the phone number for maintenance and noticed the clause for the parking space. Essentially, I could park, quote, a motorcycle, scooter such as a Vespa, car, truck, SUV, or trailer, end quote, in the space. Gears were turning. For me to be in compliance, I had to have wheels on anything parked in my space. So I went to my local version of Craigslist and I found a wheeled container similar to a shipping container. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth every cent. The complex offered storage sheds at an upcharge too. Being fresh out of high school, I didn't have much to store. My neighbor, though, did. I threw a lock on the unit and offered it to my neighbor for half the cost of a shed, $35 a month. He was able to move his stuff out of his storage unit where he was paying over $100 a month, and the container was available 24/7, 365. He was happy for the arrangement and paid several months in advance. The complex put several tow stickers for out of compliance on the trailer, but I called the tow company and faxed them a copy of the lease where it says trailers are allowed. The container was registered with the county as a utility trailer, so there's nothing they could do. They tried to fine me for improper parking, but again, I had proof that I was within my rights. They even offered to remove the charge for parking on my lease if I would relocate the container. With what my neighbor was paying, I could cover my water bill every month, so I declined. I stayed 18 months and sold the trailer to my neighbor when I moved out. He had to rent a car to relocate it to his assigned space, but he said it was worth the couple hundred he paid. He ended up saving over $1,000 a year renting from me. Other neighbors even started bringing in their own containers too, even if it meant getting a second space. Sheds were being vacated at such a large volume, the complex tried to give them away at 6 months free. Few took them up on it. The complex amended the new leases to exclude trailers, but they could do nothing about those that already had them in the spot. Instead of moving out and giving notice, renters would reassign their lease to new people so they could be grandfathered into the trailer clause. I drove by the facility 2 years or so after I moved out, going to a friend's for Thanksgiving. The complex had been sold to a new owner and changed their name. But wouldn't you know, there were still about a dozen wheeled shipping containers parked in that lot. This happened when I just graduated university. I had my main job over the weekend, which paid the living, and a side job at a large mobile phone and broadband selling company, basically retail, but with phones. The shop was located inside a larger retail store as an island in the middle, and of course, a lot of people didn't know about it and didn't exactly visit our store to buy a contract or an upgrade. Instead, they would go to the store on the high street, which was a lot nicer and bigger compared to our island. A few important details about the store. The working times are usually 9 till 2000 hours on the weekdays. Tills have to be shut at 8 p.m., otherwise it causes issues with accounting. Staff members, unless they're warehouse, cannot stay past 8:10 or 8:15 due to insurance reasons, and only the managers can lock the store up. Warehouse can stay later and they have their own exit, however it can't be used by those who are not working in the warehouse. When you start and finish, you have to put the times in a special machine which compares them to your rota, same when you go to lunch. If you finish earlier than you're scheduled, then the machine will automatically put it as unauthorized absence. The other option is putting it as sick. You cannot take holiday on the day, and the times of the rota cannot be changed on the day either. So you can't put someone as starting at 9 and change the same day as the starting at 10, as it wouldn't allow you to. If you forgot to clock out, the extra time will be counted as overtime and only the manager can amend it, but they cannot make it that you worked less than what's on the rota. However, it's also a lot easier to amend the times on the same day, as if you're trying to do it the next day, you'll need the details of the member of staff to do it, like their memorable word and so on. Also in our island store, you must have at least 2 employers working during the same hours as per company policy. It was my last day at said store. My manager decided to let me go because I didn't attend a shift due to being in the hospital, and I was still on my probation. I was told that I still have to work the notice period, which was 2 weeks. My manager, I'll call him Dan, had to create rotas 2 weeks in advance as per company policy. He can change the rotas up to last Friday of the week, meaning that he can change next week's rota on the Friday before, but not after. So Dan scheduled me on my last day on a 1700 to 2100 hour shift when my usual shifts are 16 to 20. I have asked him if this was correct both personally and in the team group chat, and he confirmed it. Dan was also the type of those whiny managers who don't do anything but complain about everything, and they don't bother to train you or show you the ropes. So I kinda knew he made a mistake, but decided not to mention it. Cue malicious compliance. Friday rolls on, and I'm hungry, so I decided to have a late lunch before my shift starts. I'm putting the order through and notice Dan is trying to call me. I decline. I finish my order to feel that Dan is trying to call me again alongside with a few texts received from him. I decide to reply. Dan says, "Hey, where are you? You are not at the store and it's already past 4 and we have one of the higher ups checking how things are going." Oh, I'm having lunch, I say. I'm not scheduled till 5 p.m., remember? Well, no, you are lying. Your shifts are always 4 till 8. I make sure of it. Get here. I can't stay as I have to try the food that will be served at my wedding and compose the menu. Oh, sorry, but I really can't. I have just ordered lunch and I'm waiting for it to be ready, and then I have to eat. I've asked you if the rota is correct, and you said it is, but in case if you don't believe me, I'll send you a screenshot and I'll see you at 5. I did send him a screenshot where I've questioned my times and he confirmed that they are correct. I haven't heard from him till I got back to the store. At the store, I see Dan talking to the higher up person. Dan notices me first, waves me over as soon as I sign in, and says he really needs to be somewhere else. He just needs to get to his office and get his coat. I nod and have a small talk with the higher up. Higher up says, "Oh, it was so nice of Dan to cover the start of your shift as you were having a family emergency. He's such a good and caring manager." Family emergency? Not sure what you're on about, but my shift has just started as per rota. The higher up is confused. He asks to see the rota, so I gladly show him the pictures Dan has posted on the group chat. Then higher up turns to me and another member of staff and asks if one of us is a team leader, and if not, when did we start? After finding out we're not team leaders and have started less than 12 weeks ago, the higher up gets visibly angry. He stops Dan as he was on his way to leave and tells him he cannot leave the premises as it is against the company's policy to leave employees who haven't been with the company for 12 weeks unattended, or to close up, so he must stay. Otherwise, the company insurance is not valid and there will be a hefty fine. Dan has no option but to stay, meaning he was missing the food tasting. He wanted to call his fiancée, however, the higher-up has reminded him no phones during the shift and while on the store floor. So Dan couldn't even let him know who was texting him non-stop. While higher-up was there and while Dan was forced to do his job, I had a few more conversations with him and brought up all the things Dan failed to provide us for training on, and alongside with the lack of support in any progression meetings. So by 8 o'clock, higher-up was ticked with Dan and was organizing a meeting with him and extra training for him, which I don't think was paid, as Dan had to do it outside of work hours. He was also put on a close monitor for at least a month. As everyone was leaving at 8 p.m., I was slowly getting ready. Dan had tried to hurry me up, but I was mainly ignoring him. The store needs to be closed before 8:10, hurry up! Oh, but you scheduled me till 9 p.m. today. I can't leave before that as the system won't allow me to clock out. Well, you must leave as insurance does not cover us against theft or damage if there's someone else in the store after 8 p.m. We have to put the alarms on too. Sorry, but I really don't want to miss out on any money. You schedule me till 9, so I'll work till 9. What are you going to do? You need to leave. I can clean the display models and the island does look like it needs to be vacuumed. The higher-up was having the best time in the world. He was still there enjoying the show since he saw that Dan put me till 9 p.m. At some point, he gets tired of our back and forth and told Dan to cover me till 9 p.m. and stay in the store, and then change the hours in the system that I finished at 9 and I can go home. Dan has tried to argue, but the higher-up has pointed out that it was his mistake, and if something happens in the store, he will be the one responsible, as he should have checked the rotas beforehand. Dan has no choice but to follow the orders. From what I've heard, he left around 10 p.m. that day as the system wouldn't allow him to log in. His fiancée also left him a few years later. I don't know the reason why, but she took the house and the dog and saved money since she never married him. I've heard that Dan works as a personal growth coach, but he's not very successful at it either. OP is a loudmouth around the HOA snitch. Oh, this is not good. How would you handle it? This just happened, and I feel like such a jerk. Backstory 1. My next door neighbors moved in 2 to 3 years ago. Initially, I was excited because they have a little boy a year younger than my son, and I remember growing up next to all my friends, and I wanted that for my son. My son back then was 2 or 3, and I quickly got to work to baking cookies to welcome the new neighbors. We brought them over, knocked on the door, and they invited us in, and the boys played. The husband showed me the tablet that has all the camera feed from the cameras that he just installed, and the wife gave me the impression that she thought that we were in a dangerous neighborhood. Honestly, just a normal middle-class neighborhood. But whatever, let her be a worrywart. I thought they were nice. Slowly, they began to do things that annoyed the rest of us neighbors. We live in an HOA neighborhood, and they began changing their yard drastically without written consent from any of us. First, they made their driveway wider, which was fine, but then they built a literal wall in between them and the neighbors to their other side. We made jokes that they must be Trump supporters because those neighbors are more obviously Latino than us, but they were still acting nice towards me. One night, the wife told me to bring them baked goods whenever I made them, since I bake often and tend to give the majority of it to my neighbors. So I asked her. I baked a chocolate cake with hazelnut frosting and then brought them some slices. Just a really quick drop-off, really. 2 days later, there was a fence 10 feet high blocking their door off 10 feet away. If they just told me to not bother bringing them baked goods, I wouldn't have given them baked goods that I put a lot of work into. All of this without asking any of us. At the same time, all of us have gotten letters from the association for minor things. Brought a trailer a couple of days before a trip to start packing? HOA letter. Car parked on the driveway for too long? HOA letter. Cover your car every night with a protective cover? HOA letter. Dogs, HOA letter, and animal control. So many more things. Do we have any proof that it's them? No. But are they the only new neighbors that we've had? Yes. Their son wants so badly to play with my son too. There have been times that he's run into our house and his mom doesn't even realize that he's gone. My neighbors have chased this kid down the street, the mom wandering out of her house when they've already caught him and are bringing him back. I feel so bad for him because it's not his fault his parents are jerks. So I accidentally got her number because her dog was loose and I texted the number, not knowing it was hers. I had to give him to the local animal hospital because I was waiting for over an hour for any communication, and I couldn't keep him because my dogs don't like Chihuahuas. After 3 hours, she called asking for him and saying how she saw my text earlier. If I had known it was her dog, I would have kept him. I just couldn't risk keeping him overnight. She reluctantly invited us to her son's birthday a few weeks ago. My mom asked her what she was doing for his birthday, and when she said party, she felt obligated to invite us, I guess. She then opens up texting as a means of letting the boys hang out. My other next door neighbor sells doobie roaches to pet stores and private clients. He has a pretty cool system set up and everything, all done out of his house. Today was the first day they've hung out after the party. They were playing with chalk and the little boy kept trying to run into my house, which I don't mind, but his mom minds, so my son kept having to bring him back. My son got tired and just locked the door. But guess whose garage was open? My other neighbor. The little boy ran to go into his house, but he was standing in his garage to catch him. My neighbor's really nice. He's my favorite, and probably everyone else's favorite too. I saw my neighbor and the crazy child and thought about just how much my son loves bugs and just said, "Hey Timmy, want to see a cockroach?" Behind me, the mom caught up and was like, "What?" And I was just so stupid that I mentioned that he has a bunch of reptiles to eat. He gives me a look and I knew I screwed up. I just told the neighborhood snitch something that I shouldn't have. I tried to later cover up when she asked probing questions because I guess she's noticed him selling something. And I told her it was only to like a couple of friends since the stores are so expensive and that he moved them out somewhere else to get them out of the house. But I fear the damage is done. Any ideas on how to distract them from contacting the HOA? People always give me ideas, but of course they got their cameras. Who do you side with, the neighbor or the OP, and what happens if the HOA finds out about this? Confirm work or I don't get to do it? Cool, then I don't get to do it. Posted by Adserim. My fiance, 27 male, and I work for the same company, and this actually happened to him a few days ago, but thought someone might get a kick out of it. We work for a trucking company that has dedicated contracted work. I found the job posting, showed it to him, and we both decided to apply for it. The job posting was listed as home daily. When we did the joke of a phone interview, we were told home daily. When we finished our initial training and spoke to the account manager, we were told home daily. That was all nearly 4 years ago. Flash forward 3 years, which is roughly a year ago, and things start falling apart. The company we work for is rather large, and the account manager has very little sway over the contracts that the company negotiates with the client. It's done by a regional manager. So, during the yearly contract update in 2022, the client makes more demands and offers less pay. The district manager just wants to keep the client as a customer and agrees blindly without thorough consideration. The biggest change that matters for the story is there were new stores added to the contract to be covered by the account, and 2 out of 4 of the new stores are not home daily. There were many other changes that happened. That's just the one that most directly affects the next series of events. Due to some other changes that drastically messed up the life of the office workers for the account manager, who had been working for the company for 10 plus years, quits without warning. We get a new account manager, Sarah. A few months later, one of the 2 supervisors, who had also been with the company 10 plus years, quits without warning. We get a new supervisor. More on him in a tick. 2 months after that, the second supervisor, also with the company 10 plus years, quits without warning. You see a pattern here? So now, the account is left with an account manager and a supervisor who both have less than a year's experience flailing to figure everything out. Now back to the bit about the home daily. About 6 months ago, my fiance started getting the loads that were not home daily. It took him a day and a half to complete one of the new stores. Day 1, he would go up to the store. Day 2, he would come back and do a super short run to conclude his shift before coming home. The first time he got the new store, he called the supervisor to ask about it. The supervisor was confused what needed clarification. My fiance says, "Will I be getting home? It's a lot of miles for a single day's run." Supervisor says, "No, you'll be sleeping roughly at this truck stop about 4 hours away from home." I thought it was home daily. Who said that? The job was posted as home daily. I was told home daily during the interview. I was told home daily by the previous account manager at training. Well, I don't know anything about that. I wasn't here for any of that. What I do know is that Sarah looked at everyone's contracts and nobody has home daily in the contract. So everyone is expected to take equal share of the new stores to make it fair. Okay, but I know there are some guys who are hired home weekends because they sleep at the operating center in their trucks and they go home for 4 days every so often. Yeah, we have some guys who live out of state. Okay, so why aren't they doing the new stores since they don't need to go home every night? As I said, everyone is expected to take equal share to make it fair, and nobody's contracts state home daily or weekend home time or whatever. That was never part of the deal. I have a family. I took this job thinking that I'd have time with them. I wouldn't have taken the job if I knew it wasn't in my contract that I'd be home daily. Well, you are free to get another job if you like, but without 10-day notice, you'll be blacklisted and ineligible for rehire. So are you quitting or not? My fiance angrily did the load, thinking it was going to be a once every now and then again thing. Turns out they sent him twice a week, bare minimum. On top of that, most of the miles for the load are back roads up and down windy mountainous roads posted at 35 miles per hour. We are paid by the miles. He drives an additional 4 hours for this new store for zero extra pay because the store is in the middle of nowhere with no major highways. He takes a major pay loss on top of the inconvenience of not being able to come home, sleep in his own bed, and be with his family. Then, about 3 months ago, the supervisor messages both my fiance and I to say that going forward, we will be expected to confirm all loads and work, or we won't get loads. We receive our work and loads 12 to 24 hours in advance, so we do have some time to confirm them. But it was never a concern before, and we already had a lot of duties to fulfill that it wasn't a priority each day to make sure we typed the message, confirm store 1124, at the end of our shifts each day. The supervisor called us both out on it and said that this was an important part of the workflow process. I asked him why it was suddenly so important, and he insisted it was always important. I told him that I had never had to confirm loads each day, and I've never failed to show up for work. And on the super odd occasion where I'm unable to do a load, it's because of something like a flat tire or like a truck breakdown that I'm waiting for repairs. And I was always sure to contact the office and let them know ASAP. Load confirmations are just busy work that's unnecessary on everybody's part. The boss insists once more it is, and please just do it. At that point, I gave up on the argument. Maybe 60% of the time, I remembered to confirm loads. My fiance, even less. Both my fiance and I receive angry messages on our work tablets stating that, going forward, if we do not confirm a load, it will be assumed that we are not able to work the load and it will be pulled from us, and we will be placed on standby, which is paid at 50% average day's load pay if we aren't called in. Well, over winter, most of the loads for this new store get canceled because of it getting drowned in snow. Now, my fiance is getting loads for it again. He got a notification that he was supposed to go to this new store on Sunday. Guess who forgot to confirm his load on Saturday? Sunday, he wakes up, no load, and an angry message from the supervisor. Because of your failure to confirm your load, it has been taken off of you and given to someone else who actually wants the work. You are on standby. Fiance rejoices. Tuesday, he's once more given the new store and forgets to confirm his load and wakes up to no load and an angry message that says basically the same and concludes with, "Call me." So my fiance calls the supervisor, and the supervisor wants to know why it's so hard to confirm loads. My fiance just kind of dismisses it with a shrug and ends the call. We found out Friday, after talking to some other drivers, that all previously home daily drivers are now doing the same thing. They get a store they don't like, mostly these two new stores. They just don't confirm. If we have to confirm to get to do the store, we just won't confirm. I used to work part-time for my university running student events. Experience is the best teacher. I participated in these events as a student, assisted in these events under someone else as part of my scholarship, and as a staff member ran the events myself. We had a new college head who was much older, approximately 50 or 60, while everyone else was in their early 20s. This woman was the most pig-headed, arrogant fool you can imagine, and despite being new, she wouldn't sit back and observe how things worked or listen to those on our team who'd been there for years. No matter what you told her, when she announced something that wouldn't work or would cause problems, the answer was the same. I'm older, so I know best. Didn't matter if it would take you longer to do it her way, or in one case, if it was technically illegal. Of course, mistakes that we'd warned her would happen were always someone else's fault or swept under the carpet. During event planning, one look at the schedule told me that she hadn't allocated the team properly. Here's our email exchange. I said, probably not a good idea to have the whole team in an hour before the event, most of them standing around doing nothing. Best to get 5 or so people in for setup, most of the team in for running the event, and hold back another 3 or 4 for cleanup. College Head said, no, I want everyone in helping out equally an hour before the event. They're only meant to do 2 hours work per event. If you have them an hour early for a 2-hour event, that's 3 hours. They'll all leave before cleanup, and the slackers will slack off, and the proactives will end up doing everything. I'm older than you, and I know best. Just do as you are told. Cue malicious compliance. Fine, but I've got some personal business to do directly after the event. I'll handle procurement and setup, but we'll need to leave right afterward the event is over. That's fine. On to other business. Day of the event. The whole team showed up an hour before her setup. As expected, 5 or so did all the setup work, while most of the team stood around on their phones. Some even got bored and wandered off. It was not the team members' fault for standing around. Only so many people can do meal prep and set up tables without getting in each other's way. 10 minutes before the event, College Head shows up and everything is running smoothly. The event was a lot of fun. Some of the team continued to wander off, some ran the events, and some participated. I was running around as a gopher, letting the College Head take credit for the event in front of everyone. Not doing any work, mind you, but taking credit for it. I made sure to remind her I had to leave right at the end of the event for personal business in front of the other colleague heads several times. To be extra spiteful, I neglected to stop several team members from wandering off who'd done no work other than stand around talking and eating, and encouraged several people who'd definitely done 2 hours worth of work to call it a night and thank them for their help. Forgetful me, I also didn't tell team members standing around during events to start cleaning up as things were finishing. All the free food was gone. All the games were over. Both students and team members were wandering off into the night. And all of a sudden, College Head says, wait, where are you going? There is so much mess and we've got to put away all the tables and tidy up all the different games, but everyone has left. Yes, we probably should have saved up a few team members to do cleanup, but they've all already done their 2 hours. Anyway, like I told you earlier, I've got some personal business to attend to directly after the event, so hey, I'll see you tomorrow. What personal business is it? This will take over an hour to do all this on my own. Hey, I'm sorry, but I said personal business because I wasn't comfortable discussing it with you or the team about what it was, as it really is quite personal, and I'm going to be late. I wandered off home for my personal business of closing all my curtains and playing Xbox in my underwear, chuckling at the thought of that arrogant woman having to do all that work by herself. The formal complaint she put in for me leaving didn't really go anywhere, as I just forwarded the email exchange to management. Sadly, pig-headed people are pig-headed because they don't learn no matter what. I eventually quit, and a few months later was introduced to my replacement's replacement, who was also ready to quit. All I gotta do is not get fired, posted by Bonbon Stella. I worked as an inspection specialist for a large flying machine factory in the Seattle area. I'd been working in a very specialized job field for about 10 years at this point. During my tenure, I had become proficient at looking up raw material specifications used in the production of large flying machines. I was performing work, not duties, well outside of the scope of my job description because the word got out that I was very good at rooting out the material specs, along with how to process them into flying machine parts. I did this because the actual scope of my work was pretty easy, and I had a good system down that kept my backlog down to nothing. I also did this extra work to show my manager that I deserved a decent merit-based raise. And when I said specialized at the top of this paragraph, I mean that I was the only person in this large flying machine company with the certifications to perform the work. Well, raise time comes around, and my manager shows up with the slip of paper that shows what kind of raise we got. He hands it to me and tells me how he was able to get me this awesome raise. What he didn't know is that I have a knack for doing mathematical equations in my head very quickly, and I quickly discovered that he was blowing smoke at my butt. So before he runs off, I tell him to stick around and do the math on my computer to show what I actually got. After I run the numbers, I show him exactly what I had done in my head. The raise I got was what was guaranteed by our union contract and no more. I confronted him about this and he had nothing to say about it. I told him that I was doing the work of an employee at a higher job rating and that I should be getting compensated as such. He tells me to put together a package of what I've been doing and make an appointment for both of us to meet with HR to present my case for an upgrade. I put together my work package, set an appointment, and show up for the meeting. The HR lady looked at my work package and was amazed that I hadn't been upgraded. We chatted for about 15 minutes because my manager didn't show up, and we were giving him a chance to make the meeting. He ended up being a no-show, which meant no upgrade. Fast forward a few weeks, and it's time for us to write up a list of our yearly goals and objectives. Apparently, this is some big deal for management, and they like to use these items to hang over our head as a carrot to chase for raises in the following year. There's this form that we're given to fill out what our business goals are for the next year and how we'll execute our plan to make those goals. And at the bottom of the form, there's a line for our signature and the date. It was the easiest goals and objectives form that I have ever filled out. I literally signed and dated the blank form and handed it to my manager. Needless to say, he had an issue with it, and he started in on me right then and there. It was in an office where at least 6 of his management colleagues also had desks. He tells me that I can't just sign a blank sheet, and I tell him, I just did, a bit louder than my normal speaking voice. And then, with the attention of his colleagues now garnered, I told him everything that I had been doing above and beyond my job description, how he gave me the BS story of the great raise I got and his no-show at the upgrade meeting. Then I iced his cake by telling him, all I have to do is not get fired and I'm still going to get the contractually guaranteed raise, so I ain't doing anything extra, starting with this stupid goals and objectives form. The look on the faces of his colleagues was of utter shock, and he had nothing to say, so I left. He never came back and pressed me to fill out the form. Maybe it's because he still had one of my size 10 stuck deep in his butt. Maybe he realized that he really screwed the pooch and couldn't face me. Shortly thereafter, I was offered a new gig in a department that came with an upgrade and a raise. My salary doubled in the 10 years that I spent there. HOA raising monthly assessments and adding fees despite the fact that we've been under budget by 60 grand plus for the past 2 years by night of knee. So we bought a house in a townhome HOA in Colorado almost a year ago. There's maybe 200 townhomes in total here. I will admit up front that I didn't put in the time or the effort into the HOA when I first moved in, and I missed the quarterly meetings, also because I work late. Here's a brief summary of what they're doing. Effective next week, they're bringing back a parking policy from 2007 that will charge $30 a month or $360 a year per car parked outside of our 2-car parking garages. Bear in mind that there is absolutely no shortage of open parking spots here every day, and the outside parking spots are completely uncovered and unsecured. It's an open community, no gates and no security. We live in a smaller town on the outskirts of Denver. This is the suburbs, not downtown Denver. The townhomes sold here are all 2 and 3 bedroom homes in a commuter neighborhood. The average household has 3 or 4 cars. The parking policy was made in 2007 when the community was built. It's a regulation, but it's not included in our CC&Rs as an article, section, or attachment. The CC&Rs do give the board authority to make regulations, but this regulation was not included in the CC&Rs that we received as new homeowners after 2007. On top of that, this regulation has not been reviewed since 2007, and frankly, it's outdated. Due to the above parking policy, I started looking into our budget. There is no shortage of open parking spots, so I thought there might be a budgetary need for this exorbitant monthly fee. What I found out was that we were over $60,000 under budget in 2017. We're on track to be under budget for about the same in 2018, $61,000 under budget as of August 15th. The surplus funds are being put in a reserve fund that's already over $1 million. This is what they're supposed to do with the surplus fund per our CC&Rs. I'm pretty sure we're so under budget because they will not use this money for the road repairs on the HOA's private property. We're involved in a 4-year-old lawsuit with the builders about the roads, so we cannot fix them with community funds. Despite being under budget for 2017 and 18, they're raising assessments in 19 from an already pricey $185 a month to $190 a month. They're raising monthly fees and adding an exorbitant monthly parking fee when we're tens of thousands under budget. How can they possibly justify raising assessments and or adding this fee? So here's what I've done. I've reached out to the community manager several times since November 15th. All I'm getting in response is, your concerns have been forwarded to the board. I reached out to my neighbors via Nextdoor, and I also went around putting flyers on people's windshields, advising of the upcoming changes and how to complain to the community manager. I know of at least 10 neighbors that complained to the management company, and they've received the same lackadaisical response. We belong to a bigger neighborhood HOA that literally encompasses half of the town, thousands of homes, and I reached out to their manager for any advice on how to proceed with the complaint, as there is no official avenue of complaint in our CC&Rs, and I'm not getting a response from the board. She just said that she doesn't really have any authority to step in. Last night, I emailed our community manager and I requested the contact information for the lawyer for our local community association. No reply yet. So I'm going to submit a complaint to my town's government, though I don't think there's much that they can do. I'm going to submit a complaint to the Division of Real Estate for Colorado, but even they admit that they neither investigate nor enforce, so I'm not sure how helpful that'll be either. If nothing comes from either of those, I'll have to go around the community getting a petition signed, but there's no official petition form or process included in our CC&Rs. How do I make sure that they don't ignore me or us? Any advice on how to proceed here? Anything I'm doing or not doing that could help get an answer? My ultimate goal is to get an emergency HOA meeting scheduled so that we can vote these things down. I've requested that in at least 3 separate emails to the community manager and the management company's general inbox. An update. I did receive an email from the community manager a couple of hours ago, and the board is scheduling an emergency meeting for next week. What would you do if you were OP? No money back? We'll see about that. Posted by Deus Ex Pirate Pete. A few years ago, when my kids were 3 and 7, we were looking for a new car for my wife. After scouring Auto Trader, we're in the UK, we saw a Mazda Zeta 6, decent mileage, couple of owners in a small Trader's down south. It was about an hour away, so we hopped in my car and went to go look at it. We arrived at the site, which had some decent looking cars, and it was a nice and tidy place, so didn't ring any alarm bells. We were greeted by 1 or 2 Romanian brothers who seemed knowledgeable and pretty free of the hard sell. I had a look around the car, very little rust, oil looked clean, tidy inside with not too much wear. The only 2 things I found was the head unit panel was not in place correctly, and one of the brackets by the engine had a bit of a dent in it, but it was a non-functional bracket and it didn't appear to have a prank, so okay. I took it for a test drive and it was okay. My wife liked it, so we paid part cash, part card. A few days later, after sorting the insurance, we went and collected it. By the time we got home, my wife got out and immediately said, "There's something wrong with this car." I took it for a drive, and yes, it had low power, sounded terrible, and did not feel safe. I immediately rang them, and they were pleasant enough and said bring it back and they would have their garage look at it, the same garage that had MOT'd it barely 2 weeks earlier. I said I didn't want to bring it back and I would pay out of my pocket to get it assessed by my garage. They didn't like this, but I didn't give them a choice. After a couple of days of being at my local garage, who we've used for years and trust, even though they're a bit pricey, we got the report. It ran to 2 pages, which I will summarize using the comment the mechanic gave us when we picked it up. Mechanically, this is the worst car I have ever seen. How it passed an MOT is beyond me. You wouldn't have seen it on a visual inspection, but this is a nail. Oh dear. So I rang the dealer and sent them the report. Again, pleasant enough, said bring it back and we can discuss it and sort out the refund. Cue the malicious compliance. So, the following Saturday, now 1.5 weeks since we bought it, we all trooped back down there and walked into their little porta-cabin office. The two brothers were sat with their faces like slapped bums. I will tell you now, sir, you will not be getting a refund today, not until our garage has checked it. My wife and I looked at each other and our hearts sank. What followed was an hour of back and forth with me explaining that we were within our rights to a full refund within 30 days of purchase. Now, this is true for goods in the UK, but I had no idea if it applied to vehicles. After an hour, my wife and I stepped outside. The kids were getting bored and fractious. "What are we going to do?" says my wife. "Well, I'm not leaving without a refund," I said. Agreed. And that was it. We went back into that office. We argued back and forth, revisited the same point over and over, while the kids moaned and cried and begged to leave. But we sat there and we argued very calmly, very matter-of-factly, without getting angry or raising our voices. At a couple of points, one brother left to serve people who had walked into the yard, and at one point he came in with another couple who were interested in a car. They heard us talking, and I slyly shook my head at the couple, and they backtracked and left. One of the brothers was raging behind his eyes. They threatened to call the police, and I begged them to do it so we could clear this up and leave. They didn't. After, and I am not exaggerating, 5 hours of this, my wife and I stepped out, and we were stood just outside the office door. "Look, we can't stay here any longer. The kids are hungry and tired and mental," my wife says. I saw the door open, barely an inch. "Okay, take my car and go feed them. I'm not leaving. I think I'll just call the police and get this sorted, but if I have to stay here until tomorrow morning, we are getting our money back," I said. I noticed the door close again. "Really?" she said. "Just give it a minute. Let's go back in a sec." "Okay," she says, looking irritated. We go back in and one brother is counting out cash on the table. At this point, it's early evening. "Sir, the deal we will do is, we will give you a full refund if you don't mention this car on any review site. It was X in cash and X on a card, yes?" Less than 5 minutes later, we were back in our car, leaving the nail behind, cash in hand and card refunded. We had found a pub that does food, and we were heading there rapidly. The kids were okay now that they knew food was near. With everything sorted, my wife and I looked at each other for a second and cheered and whooped, hollered, and banged the steering wheel, making the little lad cry, bless him. We could not believe that after 5 hours of back and forth, crying kids, belligerent salesmen, we had won. We had flipping well won. This sort of thing never happened to us, and yet there we were. We felt like the kings of the world and no one would ever mess with us. Return the car empty? Done. Posted by MA77MC. Talking to my grandmother earlier today reminded me of this story from a number of years ago. I live in Sydney and used to fly up to the Gold Coast around 3 or 4 times a year to check on my grandmother. Now the whole family was in Sydney, so someone would usually pop up once each month to help her out. Anyway, I would always rent a car from Hertz when I arrived. At the time, they offered a prepaid fuel option where you would pay an amount and not need to refuel before return. It was usually less than you would pay at the local service station, so I usually took this option. As I picked up the keys to this shiny new manual Toyota Corolla, the woman said to me, "So you have the prepaid fuel, just bring it back empty." After a few days of relaxing by the beach, I ran a few errands for my grandmother in the morning before my 1500 flight. When the fuel light comes on and the words of Hertz staff ring in my ear, "Bring it back empty." Not wanting to push it, I pulled into 7-Eleven and put 2 liters in and went on my way. The light didn't extinguish, but with the distance I needed to cover, I figured I'd be safe. About 1300, my grandmother is pushing me out the door, telling me to catch my flight, so I make the 6-kilometer trip to the airport, the whole time anxiously wondering if I'll make it with the fuel remaining. As I was coming up on the airport, I felt the engine sputter, but it was still going. Heading in, it started sputtering more, so much so that I genuinely thought that I'd run out mere meters from my destination. As I pulled through the boom gate for rental returns, I put my foot down and got a final burst of acceleration, the car determined to be the little engine that could, my finish line in sight, and the car is gonna make it. Until it didn't. The car stalled. With the momentum, I had pulled it into a spot marked Avis, and it only made it about halfway in. I tried in vain to restart it, but it wasn't to be. I got out and pushed the little engine that could into Bay 109. I was 11 bays short of the first marked Hertz, and I was a broken man, my goal so near yet so far. Torment ran through my mind. Did those 11 bays mean that I was short of my goal to bring it back empty? I mean, it was in the rental car park after all, and it wasn't uncommon for people to just, park in a spot and ignore who owns the spot. I walk into the terminal, carry-on roller bay in one hand, car keys in the other, and walk up to the rental returns. "Can I help you?" the same young woman asks as I walk up to her. "I'm returning a car," I said. She takes the paperwork and asks where I'd parked it. "Bay 109, it says Avis," I respond, her not looking up. She shrugs and talks into the radio on the counter. "Return 109, she finally says. "Did you fill it up?" I say no, and she asks roughly how much is left. "Well, none," I say. "Oh, so the petrol light is on, no worries," she says. No, I reply. I mean, it ran out of fuel as I drove in. I had to push it into the parking spot." The helpful woman gives me a blank stare for a full 10 seconds. "Wait, you let it run out? You said return it empty, so I accepted your challenge. It seems I win," I said with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The staff member turns to her colleague, points at me, and says, "Prepaid fuel, and he says he ran out in the car park." The guy looks at me with a smirk and says, "Really?" "Well, it wouldn't start back up," I reply as someone comes in from the outside to get the keys. "It's out of fuel," the woman says. "That's okay, I'll run up to Shell after I've washed it," he replies. Both terminal staff look at him as the woman, looking at me, says, "No, the customer says he had to push it into the spot." Cue the largest eyes I've ever seen. I have to see this. He walks out with me, and the guy from behind the counter following behind opens the car and tries to start it. It's cranking, but it won't turn over as all three of us burst out laughing. "I've never had one fully out before," he says when I tell him. "The woman in there told me to bring it back empty," as I walk inside, laughing to check my bags. "You can't use a competitor's phone," posted by Mashigakur. Well, folks, for those of you who don't know, I work on cell phone towers. I used to work in an extremely remote rural area for a now defunct small cell phone company. The conversations are to the best of my recollection. The area I worked was the type of area where you could drive for hours and not see anything but field, forest, and animals. Most of the sites I had were what is referred to as island sites, meaning that they don't hand off to another cell tower. And most of these sites were about 30 minutes apart on a good day. Well, I worked nights, but you get the drift. So it came around that a competitor had located quite a few sites near our sites. I, being of the mindset of efficiency, purchased a phone from them, and with approval from my boss, kept it ready, especially during upgrades. But he was the type when anyone above him says, "Boo," he'd jump and ask if he jumped high enough or if he should jump again. So a couple of months later, boss's boss leaves and we get new boss's boss who spent 250% of his life in the confines of New York City. Within his first week, he's working the switch and sees me call in from our competitor's number. Of course, he takes offense to this, and it quickly comes down that nobody may use a competitor's phone. I bring up my concerns, but they don't need to do this in New York City, so we're not going to do this. Mind you, my job is to shut down our sites and upgrade or repair them. Yes, I'm the guy you love to hate when you can't make a phone call. And so it happens a short time later, I'm at one of my most remote sites, a 45-minute drive to the next site on a good day. about 4 hours from home. Now I do my diligence. I call the switch, I tell them what I need them to change, and shut down the site. An hour later, the site's not up. So I go through everything on my end. Yep, everything's good. Crap. Now there's a couple of payphones, but they were the competitor's phone. So I start driving. It takes me about an hour and a half to get to the next site because of a freak blizzard. Crap, that site's down too. Roll on to the next site, usually in about 30 minutes, but it's snowing hard and the roads are crap. 2.5 hours on the road after leaving the original site, I finally get service. So I pull over, and in 5 minutes, we figured out the switch crossed a number and took down the wrong site. Switch promises to fix it, and I drive 3 hours back to the original site. 30 minutes later, it's still not up. This time, it takes an hour to get to the closest site, call the switch again, and they get it up after about 30 minutes, and I verify it's up. Hooray! But I still have to drive back, clean up, and make some testing calls. 18 some odd hours after I left my driveway, I pull back in and submit my time, complete with the overtime. It's my Friday, so I turn off my phone and I hit the bed. Monday morning, I turn on my phone for our weekly call-in meeting, and I crap you not, it buzzes with new text and voicemails for 20 straight minutes, all from boss and boss's boss. Well, I jump on the call, and first thing I hear is boss's boss. Why the heck did you have a nearly 9-hour outage for a 30-minute upgrade? Before I get a word in, and how dare you claim 9 hours of overtime where you were clearly freaking around not doing your job? So I tell him, well, there were a series of issues outside of the site and a freak snowstorm slowed my response. I hit send on emails that I had already prepared before clocking out for the weekend with a full rundown of events of the night, as a reply to the emails coming down from him dismissing my needs for a competitor's phone, and included his boss, the vice president of the company. Boss's boss says, I don't want to freaking hear excuses from you. Why didn't you just use a freaking payphone and call for help? Literally everyone on the call groaned. In case you don't remember, I just replied to a series of emails where you forbade me, under threat of termination, from using a competitor's phone. At this point, I hear VP join our call. And since payphones are owned by a competitor, I spent 6 hours driving around in a blizzard searching for service instead of spending 45 minutes to an hour in making a call on a competitor's phone. I never freaking threatened to terminate anyone. Don't be stupid. You could have used a payphone. The VP cuts in. It appears, boss, that you do not remember what you said, and Mr. Kerr has clearly documented his actions on the night in question. Boss, please call me immediately. Thank you everyone else for your time this morning. Please have a good day. This meeting is over. Boss's boss was removed shortly afterwards, having a fairly rocky rest of his short employment. I now work for the company which purchased our competitor. I've moved to my home state, though I still work a rural market, and it's not quite as bad. This story takes place in a glorious HOA. Don't sue. We'll let you come onto our property to fix your sewer line. Posted by Hope We Sink. The house that I grew up in was built on the side of a hill. Great views, but the geography posed some challenges for the city utilities, sewage in particular. Their solution was to put all the houses on the hill in what was called a shared line. Essentially, one big pipe ran through all of our backyards, just below the house's basements. Effluent would flow out from the houses into the shared pipe and then down the hill to the city sewer line by the bottommost house. When we moved in, we were at the highest point that it was possible to build on and still be part of that shared sewer line. But a few years later, someone bought a lot just over the crest of the hill and linked up with ours, without being part of the planned community that had an HOA that took care of the sewer line, among other things. And in fact, they did so without the HOA's approval. And so for the next 2 decades, my family would be the subject of near constant harassment over the state of the sewer. Their end of the line was lower than ours by just enough that it would stop flowing and clog, often backing up into their basement bathroom and shower. They'd accuse us of diverting our effluent to their line, because I guess we were some kind of plumbing wizards. Now, the reason that nobody built a house on that part of the hill during the original development was that the soil was unstable, something hydrology related. Sure enough, over the years, that house would occasionally separate from the hill and slide down a couple of inches. But our neighbors had connections in the code enforcement agency, so the place never got condemned like it should be. They just had to shore it up and reconnect all the utilities. The thing is, the further down the house moved, the steeper the negative incline was from their sewer connection to our junction box, making the clogs and the backup even worse. At one point, it got so bad that their sewer barely even flowed. Some days, it got completely clogged. And somehow, this was our fault. They spent the next year calling us every time they tried to flush a toilet and crap came out of their downstairs shower. They called a plumber, who said that they had to redo their part of the shared line, and to do it, they'd have to bust through our 2-story masonry wall so that they could get a backhoe onto our property and dig out the line. Of course, we had issues with this. We said no, you will not come onto our property and tear it up with a big old piece of construction equipment. Hire human laborers or something. But instead, they hired lawyers who started slinging paper around. According to them, we were in violation of state law that specifically gave an implied easement granting a homeowner access through another's property to maintain their own. So we hired lawyers of our own who said that we basically had a choice. We could win the case, but pay a ton of money, or just let it happen. Either way, we'd be screwed. But they pointed out one important fact, that the 20-year-old masonry wall wasn't in the greatest of shape anyway, so a few months later, we presented them with a bill for $75,000 for the rebuilding of the wall, installation of a new set of stairs, replacement of the entire wrought iron fence that had separated the two properties, resodding, replacement of ornamental plants and shrubs, and some minor repairs to our sewer, which they had borked up while relaying their pipes. I'm not a general contractor, but my guess is that they could have hired pick and shovel labor to dig out that pipe and replace it with a new one for a fraction of that price. But no, they had to have a giant Caterpillar tread machine to do it. They balked, but then we handed them a Xerox copy of the letter that their lawyers had sent us with, pursuant to paragraph blah 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 of the Common Code of blah blah blah, citing the next paragraph, which stated that the person using the easement was 100% responsible for any damage that might be caused. They still balked, but my parents put a lien on their property that stayed there to the day that they tried to sell, at which point they had to pay up or the purchaser's creditors wouldn't underwrite a mortgage. I think they had to pay interest too, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Can you believe that OP got literally a $75,000 wall basically for free? What would have you done? A long time ago, I worked on the service desk for a relatively large, but not gigantic, company in the UK. There were several service desk teams spread across the country with their own policies and practices and such. Mine was pretty chill. The attire was smart casual. The relationship we had with users was friendly. We had a team leader who would really look out for us. I think I was really lucky, given what some of the other service desk teams had to deal with: suits and ties, users interrupting you when you're on the phone, team leaders who would just vanish for half a week with no warning. While working there, I was living in a rural area, a hamlet that was about a mile from the nearest bus stop, 9 miles from the nearest train station, and 2 miles from the nearest shop. And my commute was about an hour through the countryside. It was a nice drive, but it was also unpredictable. Flooding on the roads wasn't uncommon, with detours around the affected areas taking 20 minutes. You'd occasionally get snow up in the hills when it's sunny everywhere else, and if you were unlucky enough to find a herd of cattle being moved down the road, that could add 10 minutes to your commute. The unpredictability of my commute was something that I had raised in my interview. I wanted assurances before I had even been offered a position that my commute situation would be taken into consideration. As such, I made an arrangement with my team leader and with the arrangement of the rest of the team. I would work the late shift from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and as there would usually be 2 to 3 people in by that point, so the desk would still be covered if I was late. If I were late, I would make up the time another day or after hours. During my probation, I was asked to log when I arrived and when I left, but once I had passed, my team leader trusted me not to take the crap. However, Note that this informal arrangement was actually against company policy, and it hadn't been signed off by HR. Not that our local HR team would have minded, but the head office probably would have complained. Unfortunately, my team leader ended up leaving the company, frustrated at being passed over for promotion one too many times. Once he left, I ended up reporting directly to the service desk manager. The service desk manager would come down to visit the office once a month. Once he took over the team, he started coming down once a week, and it turned out that, on his second and third visits, I arrived late for work. Not that late, I should add, maybe 5 minutes on one day, 7 minutes on the other. However, nothing was said, just my apologies and my teammates saying that's okay. On the third week, however, a meeting was scheduled at 8:30 a.m. for 9 a.m. I was invited to the meeting despite not starting until 10 a.m. When the meeting started and they realized I wasn't due to work for another hour, they rescheduled the meeting to start at 10 a.m. And on that particular day, I encountered snow in the hills on the way to work. On a section of my commute where I would normally be bombing it at 60, 70, 80 miles per hour, visibility was down to around 20 to 25 meters, and my speed had dropped to sub 30 miles per hour. At one point, I had to stop due to a car turning right across the traffic, so I grabbed my phone, took a photo of the snow, and sent it to my team to tell them that I'd be late. I finally turned up to the office about 20 minutes late, at which point I saw I'd missed several calls in teams asking me to join the meeting. It turns out the meeting was still ongoing, so I joined it. As soon as I got in, my new boss stopped whoever it was that was talking and began to berate me in front of everyone else for my tardiness. This meeting was supposed to start at 9 a.m., but we postponed it because you didn't start until 10 a.m. It's now 20 minutes past and you're only just shown up. I'm sorry, boss. I wasn't aware that the meeting had been scheduled. I would have left earlier if I knew. So you plan to be late. Is that what you're saying? No, that's not what I meant. My commute is unpredictable, and sometimes it takes longer. Then you leave earlier. Nobody else had issues with their commute this morning. I encountered unforecasted snow on my commute this morning. I didn't expect to be delayed. Really? Snow in April? Yes, I took a photo and sent it to my team about 40 minutes ago so they know I was running late. But you didn't send it to me. I sent it to the team on Teams. You should have received it. You should have emailed it to me. I don't have my work email on my phone. Then install it on your phone. I don't think you have the authority to tell me what I should install on my personal phone. There was a moment of silence, and I could see a few of the faces on Teams react with shock to my comment. My boss said we would talk after the meeting was over and said that I had missed so much of the meeting that there's no point of me remaining there, so I should get to work. I dropped off the call, looked at my team, and then asked if anyone wanted a coffee before heading to the machine with 2 mugs. I returned with 3 and got to work, checking with my colleagues if they minded me grouping out of the phones while I waited for our boss to call me back. They said sure, so I spent the time working through tickets and making changes that wouldn't require me to make any calls or remote into users' desktops. At about 10:50 a.m., the call from my boss came, on my personal phone. Austin, I would like you to go somewhere private. Boss, this is my personal phone. I think you should call me on my work phone or Teams. I'm calling you on your personal phone so you can go somewhere private. If you want this conversation to happen in private, I can call you from a conference phone in one of the meeting rooms. No, that isn't necessary. It's fine. I'll call you back. I hung up and grabbed a stock laptop that I'd been building the previous day and a USB stick, taking them into one of the meeting rooms I'd seen was vacant. When I sat down, I called my boss from the conference phone while logging into the laptop with my details. I should probably add now that my boss had called me from a mobile number rather than a landline. All calls from company landlines were recorded, but calls between mobiles were not. By calling him from the conference phone in the meeting room, I could be sure that the call would be recorded. Hi boss, it's Austin. This really wasn't necessary. Your phone was perfectly fine. I'm sorry, I don't keep a charger in the office as my last cable got stolen. The battery doesn't last that long anymore and I didn't want to run it out before the end of the day. Fine, whatever. We need to have a talk to address your recent tardiness. As I said on the call earlier, my commute can be quite unpredictable. That's still no excuse. You knew what your commute was like when you took the job. You should have anticipated that you might need to leave early. Yes, and I addressed this in my interview, and I said that I wanted assurances that I'd be allowed some flexibility in my start time in case my commute took longer than anticipated. That's not in line with company policy. You start at 10 a.m., so you should arrive by 10 a.m. I made an agreement with my previous team leader that if I arrive late, I can make up the time another day.
But you didn't make that agreement with me, and how do you think your colleagues think with you arriving late all the time?
It's once or twice a week at most, and for every day that I arrive late, I arrive early on another day. More often than not, I put in over my allocated hours. And when I made that agreement with my old team leader, my colleagues were happy with it. I'll send you the email now. While I'd been talking, I'd been searching through my emails for the original email outlining the agreement I'd made with my team leader. The email chain had actually started on the day of my interview with him emailing my two colleagues, explaining his proposed arrangement and seeking their okay. They had both said yes, and when I started working there 5 weeks later, he forwarded the email to me as confirmation that everything was cool.
I don't need to read this email, Austin. Whatever arrangement you had with your previous team leader ended when he left. This department now works to the company policy. You are to arrive on time. And to make sure that you do arrive on time, from now on, I want you to send me a screenshot of your desktop every morning when you start working at 10 a.m. with your computer's date and time visible. And I want you to send another email to me when you finish working at 6 p.m. every evening with your computer's date and time visible.
But if my computer has had an update overnight, it can take 5 minutes to start up. What should I do then? Should I send you update logs?
Then turn up 5 minutes early. I have another meeting to go to, so I need to leave now, but I expect the first email tonight. I will tell you when you can stop.
He hung up before I could say okay or goodbye or anything. I logged into the call recording software and grabbed the ID of the call I just had. If I pulled the recording out of the server, it would have been logged. Instead, I had logged into the application server directly, searched for the recording, and copied it to a USB stick. I hadn't gotten around to installing antivirus onto this computer yet, so there was no data loss prevention systems in place. That's the kind of software companies install on computers to lock down USB drives and track what people copy to and from USB drives after their use has been approved. I went back to my desk, told the team what had happened, and they said that it sucked. We had a chat about what I was going to do, that I have to start arriving 20 or 30 minutes early every day to ensure that I'm logged in at 10 a.m. They offered to grab an old laptop and set up the desktop so it looks like my desktop so they could take a 10 a.m. screenshot if I did turn up late. I explained that it wasn't necessary. If I turned up late, I'd just explain why and involve HR. For the next week, I did as he asked. I would arrive anywhere from 15 to 40 minutes early and log into my computer. And then I'd go off and make coffee, hop downstairs, outside for a cigarette, just kill time until 10 a.m. arrived. Just before 10 a.m., I'd be back at my computer, take the screenshot, and send it to my boss. Then, at 6 p.m., I'd do the same. Probably a week and a few days later, the boss visited our office. I remember turning up about 25 minutes early that day. My boss made a smarmy comment about how I should be happy and proud that I'm being punctual. I just said, sure, checked my computer hadn't done an update overnight, offered to make coffee for the team, and then went off with 2 mugs. I came back with 3 mugs at about 10:45 a.m., and my boss commented on how long coffee takes to make here. We had a bean-to-cup machine. It would grind the beans for every cup. It was good coffee, but not particularly fast. Once I'd handed my cups to my colleagues, I grabbed my cigarettes from my bag and headed off outside. I came back around 10 or 12 minutes later, and my boss asked me where I'd been. I was enjoying my morning coffee with a cigarette.
But there's work to be done.
I don't start work until 10 a.m.
Just because you start at 10 a.m., it doesn't mean you can't get started early.
Sure, I could, but as I don't start until 10 a.m., I don't have to, unless you're approving me to do overtime.
No, I'm not saying that, but if you're here, you may as well make yourself useful.
If I remember correctly, we both acknowledged last week that I start work at 10 a.m. and finish work at 6 p.m.
That isn't what was meant by our conversation.
But that's how I interpreted it. I didn't wait for him to reply, just turned around and sat at my desk. It was 9:59 a.m. at this point, so I took a screenshot of my desktop, emailed it to him, and got to work. The routine continued through to the end of the week, and then partway through the following week. The boss had visited our office again on a day when I had arrived over 30 minutes early. We had had very heavy rain that day, so I had left extra early to avoid any detours due to flooding. I'd also dressed appropriately for the weather. Wellington boots, jeans with waterproof overtrousers, and a heavy wax jacket. On days like this, I'd normally come in through the fire escape. Well, it was actually a terrace, but facilities didn't want us using it for health and safety reasons, so it was only used as a fire escape.
As it was sheltered, I could leave my wet weather clothes on the terrace to dry. There were 2 other pairs of wellies and heavy jackets out there already. Enter the building in my dry clothes, and then head to a bathroom to get changed into something a little smarter. As I walked past my boss, he looked shocked that I'd walked in jeans and a t-shirt. I pointed down at my shoeless feet and then outside at my wet weather clothes. He asked me if that was really necessary. They should do a reality TV show where they send city boys to live out in the countryside. That would be entertaining. A good 5 or so people in earshot laughed. He nervously laughed along with them. I went off and changed, came back, offered the team a coffee, left with 2 mugs, came back with 3, grabbed a cigarette, and went downstairs for a smoke. I was back at my desk with 5 minutes to spare. Logged in, waited until 9:59 a.m., took a screenshot, emailed it to him, and then logged into the phones and got to work. The rest of the day went on as usual. However, come 4 p.m., he had vanished. His laptop was still at his desk, but he was nowhere to be seen. Normally, he would leave around 4 p.m., the same time as my 2 teammates. At about 4:45 p.m., he finally emerges, looking visibly shaken. He tells me how today has been terrible and how one of the other offices has serious phone issues, and asks me if I've been getting calls from other offices. No, our phone group is only configured to take calls from this business unit. What? Calls are supposed to overflow to your lines if the other lines are all engaged. Not since I've been here, and that's a good 18 months now. I'm thinking to myself, oh crap, I just screwed myself and my team. I'm going to add you into the central phone group. We need as many people on the phones as possible. Okay, I'll see what I can do, but we don't have training on or access to any of the systems used by the other offices. Just provide support wherever you can. At about 4:50 p.m., I started getting calls from the other offices. Probably about 50% of them I can't do anything about. I tell the user I'll log a ticket and assign it to the relevant team. They would frequently ask me to transfer them, but I explain that their call came to me because all their lines are likely engaged. I'm sure I peed off a lot of users that day. I mean, some of the calls were about programs that I'd never even heard of. In one case, I picked up the phone to someone who I'd already answered the phone to and logged a ticket for. 5:45 p.m. comes along, and the frequency of calls hasn't ceased. Evenings are usually quite chill in this office. It's usually a good opportunity to work on requests and the unfinished admin work. But the phone was unrelenting. 5:50 p.m., it continues. 5:55 p.m., still going. I get off a call just in time for 6 p.m. and log out of the phone. I spent a few minutes going through the few things I still had open on my screen and was about to take a screenshot when my boss, still in the office at 6 p.m., asked me why I'd stopped taking calls. Well, I finish at 6 p.m. But we need people on the phones. The team at the office that has gone down is usually in until 8 p.m. We were already short 2 people on the phones with you helping out. In the old days, an evening like tonight would be one of those nights where I make up for the lost time from being late in the morning. But, as we agreed, I start at 10 a.m. and finish at 6 p.m. It's now 6:03 p.m., so I'm already past my finish time. Look, Austin, sometimes we need to put in a little extra for the company. For the department. We really need you tonight. Do I get paid overtime? No, I cannot authorize that. You can have time off in lieu. I'm happy to do flexible working and I'm happy to do overtime, but I don't do time off in lieu. Austin, I've been really pleased with your performance over the last 2 weeks. Impressed even. Please don't disappoint me tonight. I turned around, took a screenshot of my desktop, emailed it to him, and locked my computer. I want you to send me a screenshot of your desktop every morning when you start working at 10 a.m. with your computer's date and time visible. And I want you to send another email to me when you finish working at 6 p.m. every evening with your computer's date and time visible. Those were your exact words. How could I disappoint you? I've done exactly as you asked. I don't think that's exactly what I said. Yes, it is. I have a recording of the call. I have it transcribed. That is exactly what you said. But, okay, I'll stay until 7 p.m. Oh, thank you. But first, I want an email from you reaffirming the agreement that I made with my previous team leader with local HR CC'd in, and I want next Friday off, paid, no holiday allowance, making up for all the time I've wasted in the office arriving early so I can send you your 10 a.m. screenshot of my desktop. Or I can send the recording and transcript of our call 2 weeks ago to HR and the logs of you deleting the recording from our system to our data protection officer, unless you can show that you gained her approval before deleting the recording. Send me the email from your old team leader again, the one with the agreement. He replied, reaffirming the agreement, and I ended up working until nearly 7:30 p.m., as the forecast said the rain would be stopping then. I ended up leaving 2 months later. My rule is always 2 years. If I don't get a promotion, I leave. There was no chance I was getting a promotion after that episode with my boss, so I left 4 months short of my rule. I ended up getting a job at a city closer to me, for more pay, no answering of phones, and with fewer C roads on the commute, which made the journey a lot more consistent. And when they asked why I'd only worked for my last employer 20 months, the commute was too unpredictable.
This story takes place in an HOA, or at least that's what this insane Karen thinks. To give some backstory, I'm a 19-year-old in a community college living in a small neighborhood in my parents' old, small house. I mow my own lawn, which is reasonably small because there is no HOA and I can't hire anyone to do it for me. Also, the sun and exercise is great. 3 of my neighbors are either elderly, don't have the time, or don't own mowers of their own, so I mow their reasonably small lawns for free at the same time that I mow mine. I live in a very close neighborhood, so while I may do mowing, another neighbor may power wash driveways or some such. Let's just say I mow out of the goodness of my heart, and I get compensated with a bottle of cold water afterward by 2 out of the 3. The third, however, is where the malicious compliance begins. The third neighbor is a very stubborn 40-something-year-old lady who owns her own mower. She can afford to hire someone to do it for her, is very specific about how and when her lawn gets done even though it's free. Reason 3 ticks me off the most, honestly, because she does not let me use my mower or fix hers. Seriously, it's like she's punishing me for volunteering to help her. And this mower is a piece of junk. The blades are dull, and she doesn't let me sharpen them. It's clogged full of old grass. She doesn't let me clean it. And yet, every time I ask if I can tidy it up, she snaps, "Quit wasting time and just get the job done." She is mean, entitled, and doesn't care that I do 4 lawns in one day. Even on days where I can't mow the lawn because I'm feeling under the weather or I'm just busy with school, she threatens to call the HOA. Again, we don't have one, and report me for running a business without a license unless I get the lawn mowed. I'm pretty sure of 3 things. You don't need a license to mow a lawn, it's not a business since I don't ask for money or compensation, and that she doesn't have the number for the homeowners association that doesn't exist. I honestly should have stopped volunteering to mow her lawn a long time ago, but I just never had the heart. Except for last week. It's July, rainy and very hot, and on the morning I was scheduled to mow, it poured like a son of a bee. Now, those of you who mow lawns know, you can't, or rather shouldn't, mow your lawn directly after it rains for various reasons, and my neighborhood is pretty shaded, so it takes at least a day to dry up. So around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm just relaxing and enjoying the free time, when out of nowhere, there's a frantic smashing of a fist on my door. I would call it pounding, but it honestly wasn't. Lo and behold, it's stubborn lady Karen, looking annoyed as ever. As soon as I crack my door, the yelling starts, and I'm almost blasted back as she tries to push my door open. I couldn't make out most of what she was saying, but I did hear the words lazy, brat, and millennial thrown in there. I'm pretty laid back and used to dealing with angry adults, so this doesn't irk me all that much, but when she pushed the door open, that started to tick me off. And then she started to talk in an understanding voice. "Why isn't my lawn mowed? I need it mowed right now." "Ma'am, it rained pretty heavily today, and I don't give a rat's butt what the weather is like. You better get your freaking butt out there. I have company." "Ma'am, I'm not going to do your lawn. I didn't even mow my own today. Please stop harassing me." With her teeth clenched and her neck veins popping. "If you don't mow the lawn right freaking now, I will report you like I should have done a long time ago." Now, while I could have argued, which I don't like to do, I thought of a better plan. "All right, ma'am, may I at least use my mower?" "No freaking way, you snot-nosed kid. I want my lawn exactly the way I like it." My plan was in action. So, grabbing her lawnmower and seeing that her and her company's freshly rained-on fancy cars were all right on the edge of the lawn, I started to mow. I only got about halfway through before the mower completely shut down due to clogging and the sheer dullness of the blade, but it all worked out. Later that day, after a nice shower and a meal, I heard the reaction to my compliance, which was, to my amusement, the insane screaming and ranting about why the lawn was only half done and every car was caked in mud and grass. I only got in trouble with her, as none of my neighbors liked her very much, and of course she threatened again to report me to the non-existent HOA, to which I said, go ahead. And then, once and for all, I told her that I refused to mow her lawn ever again. An update. I would just like to add that the other neighbors are going super out of their way and pitching me a few dollars to help me buy a brand new self-propelled mower. Go neighborliness.
All expenses paid vacation? Sure thing. Posted by Evertiro. Ages ago, I was a senior developer for a company that revitalized other companies. Think of it as sort of a mini Shark Tank. We would find small businesses that had a great idea but were struggling, and we'd help them achieve their goals in exchange for a cut. Sometimes this meant providing development or engineering talent to get a product off the ground. Sometimes it meant providing literal capital. Sometimes it meant providing staffing services, like support staff and experienced executives for commonplace needs. We were also a relatively small company, so it wasn't uncommon for our people to have multiple hats. There was one time when I was working as development lead for one client while acting as interim CTO for another client. It could be a bit chaotic, but it paid pretty well. It was a great experience in a wide variety of things I normally wouldn't have had, and it was usually pretty fun. So, one Friday afternoon, we get a call from a client who was particularly frustrating, a frequent flyer, if you will. They seem to make every 30-second fix into an insurmountable problem. I'm going to be intentionally vague about the specific industry the client was in. It's a tiny industry that anyone in their industry would be able to identify them just from the industry and city. This particular call comes in early in the afternoon. They recently moved things around and now none of their printers work. Obviously, it's mission critical. We do some remote troubleshooting, but can't even get a flicker of life from the device. We spent an hour or so trying to work through what happened before discovering that there's a really good reason it won't work. The cable didn't reach where they moved it to, so it wasn't actually plugged in. Well, that's about as stereotypical as an IT problem can get, right? Just plug it in and you'll be good to go. But management says that's not the solution they want. And while it's totally possible to run a Cat5 line to the new location, they really want it wireless since that's the big thing these days. Okay, that's easy too. Most of our comparably sized clients had switched to wireless networking for parts of their offices, so we already had the right procedures in place, deployment scripts set up, and so on. All they had to do was plug in the device, which could be very easily acquired at any electronics store, and we could remotely handle everything else in a matter of minutes. But nope, management dictates that we absolutely have to have a person on site in the morning to set it up for them. At this point, it's very late afternoon on a Friday, and everyone but me and my boss, the CEO, had gone home for the day. Boss isn't about to lose his weekend, and crap rolls downhill, so I drew the short straw. We reached out to the client to make sure that they knew what they were asking. They were in Chicago. We were several states away in the Midwest, nearing the end of the day on a Friday. If they wanted me to be there by morning, they'd have to pony up for whatever flight we could arrange at short notice, and there was only one flight left that night going from our relatively small airport to Chicago, and the only available seat was in first class. Additionally, it would be taking off in just under 2 hours, meaning I wouldn't have time to get home and pack anything if I was going to make the flight. They reiterated that it was absolutely crucial that I be there in the morning, and they would happily pay for whatever flight was necessary. Additionally, I was told that they would have a room pre-booked at the Palmer House. They regularly use the room there for VIPs and such, and I could charge whatever I needed to the room. Further, they said that if I ended up needing to stay longer than the day, they'd reimburse me for any clothing or essentials I had to purchase since it was so incredibly last minute. Okay, I can live with that. I get to the airport 10 minutes before boarding, make it through the vacant airport, past the TSA checkpoint, and to my gate as they're closing the door. Literally the last person on the last flight of the day. I arrive in Chicago and, shockingly, there's a company car, effectively a limo, literal black car service before Uber was a thing, waiting for me. He takes me to the hotel, as promised, and hands me an envelope before pulling away from the curb. The envelope contains a prepaid debit card and a note saying it has $250 on it for incidentals, but please charge anything I can to the room. Sweet. Was expecting it to be a long weekend in grungy clothes. I checked in and went to bed. The next morning, I show up at their office bright and early. I sit around for half of the morning before anyone shows up to let me in. They then show me the new printer area, which is, as expected, well outside of the area of the office, which was originally wired for networking in what was once a break area. I go, yep, that's not going to work with your old wired hub. Run across the street, literally door to door was one street apart, to the closest electronics store, pick up their shiny new wireless router, run back to their office, plug it in, and then get on the closest computer, run through the 30-second setup, run the script that updates the configs for their quirky, antiquated software so that it picks up the new printers in the office, and tell the owner that it's all set up. He gets this sort of confused look on his face and says, "Already?" I respond by pointing out that we did tell them in advance that we could do it remotely if they were willing to actually plug in the device for us, and he finally realized how silly the call-out was. But now he feels obligated to save face. I'm instructed that I'm to remain in Chicago until the close of business Monday to ensure there are no issues with the new hardware under actual use. Obviously, it'd be fiscally irresponsible to fly me out twice in a week. I asked for clarification. They're instructing me to stay checked into the fairly expensive hotel and keep billing things to my room through Monday night? Yes. What am I supposed to do with the rest of the weekend? Is there anything else at their local office that I can fix while I'm here? Nope. Go eat a hot dog and play tourist. Just keep my phone handy and make sure that I show up at opening time on Monday. Okay, can do. I go back across the street, pick up a charger for my phone, find a nearby department store, and pick up a few changes of cheap clothes. I stop by the hotel to drop off my purchases and spend the rest of the weekend playing tourist. Okay, I did a tiny bit of sightseeing and spent most of the time catching up on sleep, but I did ensure to avail myself of room service for every single meal at their expense before showing up bright and early Monday morning. I sat in their office for the majority of the workday before the owner came and found me to give me the travel details for my return flight. He even suggested that I'd done a great job, really I didn't do anything but plug a device in, and should get a drink before heading to the airport and bill it to the room. As suggested, I went back to the hotel, packed my stuff in my laptop bag, stopped in the bar for a drink, who knew hotels had $100+ drinks, and headed to the airport. All told, they shelled out about $1,000 just for the room, probably 2/3 of that in room service fees, several hundred in transportation to and from the airport, not to mention the flights, because they didn't want to walk across the street, pick up the easily obtainable piece of hardware, and plug it in. I got a 3.5-day vacation with first-class travel, one way anyway, halfway across the country for doing just that. Biohazard problem? Alright, we'll do whatever it takes. Posted by Tilly Bean. I finally quit my job as a teacher at a small private preschool that's been turning into a dumpster fire for about a year now. As such, I thought I would post my small but satisfying MC here in celebration. Disclaimer, do not read if you can't handle the thought of dirty diapers. As a dad, bring it on. Just makes it funnier. Let's dive right in. So let me explain some context first. This school was my dream job right out of college, as their mission statement aligns with nearly everything I learned in school with current research and whatnot. At first, it was great. I got hired during the pandemic, so there were very few kids enrolled at first, and everything was relatively calm. Slowly, however, everything began to unravel. The owner is new to business and does not know how to balance that with the empathy and emotional energy it takes to run a school with small children. I slowly began to see the dollar signs in his eyes. He was catering to rich families and would do anything to keep up the front of a perfect school, no matter what. He would disregard the teacher's mental and physical health for the sake of his image. He would hold tight to the money the center made, and despite repeated requests from teachers and the director, it was nearly impossible to get him to invest in anything that the center needed, such as more outdoor equipment for the playgrounds, items teachers need each week for their lessons, and so on. This even goes for things that are posing a safety hazard. The infant-toddler playground has a fence lined entirely on the outside by small rocks. The children reach out right through, pick one out, and stick it in their mouths. The teacher spent a lot of time corralling children away from the fence. His only solution was to put up some chicken wire on the outside, but only in certain areas and not even in our main problem area. Apparently, it would have looked horrible to find an alternative decorative option aside from small rocks around his building. Needless to say, he made it difficult to get anything new or needed for the center. Then we got a new assistant director, or AD. She was, okay. She was a former teacher promoted to the position after our former AD moved, but she had very little admin experience or charisma. Suddenly, with her addition to the team, the admin began to crack down on everything. They started raising the bar on curriculum and classroom standards, on employee behavior and dress code. They would add a new thing to the handbook every week as they discovered new things happening that they disliked. We started getting at least 2 emails a week with some other new expectation, 90% a negative thing they wanted to tell us about. Unfortunately, being that the childcare system in America is utter garbage and has a high turnover rate of teachers, our school was perpetually understaffed. This made adhering to new guidelines and expectations hard, especially when they were struggling to get us the time we needed away from our classrooms to fulfill their requirements for lesson planning and such. So, here comes the small but satisfying malicious compliance. At one of our trainings, the AD instructed us on new protocol for our diaper pails. If your diaper pail fills up before the end of the day, you can't put the bag in a trash can inside the building. It must be taken outside and thrown in the dumpster. But the pails should be big enough to last you all day, so we aren't sure why you guys are emptying them out so often. The diaper pails they provided us with were super small and cheap. The only way they would last all day is if you were only throwing away small-sized diapers. The infant room was the only one able to use the pail all day without needing to empty it and replace the bag. My room throws out about 50 to 70 diapers every day, and it would fill up after about 20 of those and need to be emptied. By the time you got to the 2-year-old room, they had large diapered children and could fit maybe 1 round of diapers in it before they would have to change it out. Most of us had been throwing the diaper bags in the trash can contained within the diapering area. Children would rarely be anywhere near the trash can we used, or if they were, the bag was tied up tight before being thrown in. This was fast and easy and allowed us to get on with our busy and fast-paced day. But no, it posed too much of a biohazard, they said. We teachers suggested that this problem could be fixed if they could get us bigger and nicer diaper pails, or even 2 of them in the older rooms who needed more dirty diaper storage. Most of us had pails that were broken in some way anyway, and the locking system on them was so awful that even my least sneaky 12 months old could get into the pail itself easily. I'd caught them gazing into the abyss of dirty diapers several times, but anytime we told the admin about this, they didn't do anything to fix it aside from just telling us to redirect them. And yet, throwing the bags away in the trash cans they can barely reach was more of a biohazard. AD says, okay, we'll see about the pails being replaced, but honestly, just take them out to the dumpster. We ask, okay, how are we supposed to go out to the dumpster 2+ times a day when we are ratio locked on teachers in the classroom? Now, ratio locked means that there are too many children for one teacher to legally be allowed to be alone in with the room, so both teachers have to be in the room at all times. AD says, oh, just call us every time you need it brought out. Someone will step in for you, or they can take it out. All right. So, on the next day, we do just that. We call when we need it taken out. AD says someone will be over soon. But wait, we're understaffed, and there's always something going on elsewhere in the building. Hours pass. Nobody comes. The diaper garbage stays by the door forgotten, posing more of a biohazard than if it were sitting contained in the garbage can. The other classrooms give up and start looking for other ways to get around the new rule. But my co-teacher, CO, and I decide on a different course of action. We take it out ourselves on our lunch breaks. So, CO takes it out on her 11:30 a.m. lunch break to get rid of the large load of morning diapers, and I take it out on my 2 p.m. lunch break to get rid of the lunch and nap diapers. Between getting it out, walking out of the building, opening the heavy gate to the dumpster, throwing it in the dumpster, and walking back, this took an extra 5 minutes or so on our lunchtime. Sometimes it would take longer if we had to help out in the classroom for a few minutes before rushing it out and going on break. Eventually, AD asked us why we're throwing our lunches off by a couple of minutes every day. We explained that we do not want the diaper garbage sitting out in the classroom, but that it was hard to get anyone in to allow us that 5 minutes to take care of it. Oh, AD decides that this is fine. So we carry on with this. And then one day, I end up having to do the diaper trash after my lunch. I get into the room to grab the bag out of the diaper pail, and CO asked me for some quick help before I take it out. The other teacher who was covering my lunch was outside with the 1-teacher ratio allowed for our age group, so CO just needed some help before I went to relieve her of duty. Of course I help her. She also needed a bathroom break, which is not an uncommon request between lunch transitions, since it's sometimes the only time we get to go. Again, it's hard to get people to come cover you for anything in an understaffed center. By the time I finish helping her and get the diaper trash out, it's been 15 minutes over my normal lunchtime. Maybe, normally, this wouldn't be a problem. But today, apparently the teacher covering me had been needed back in their home classroom exactly after I got back, because the AD was in that room covering for them while their CO went home and they, of course, had to do lunches. The AD was supposed to have been helping with a meeting with some parents. They ended up being 15 minutes late. Whoops. Later, I get called to the office just to talk to the AD. They lecture me, asking me what I was thinking coming back so late. I explained my situation. CO had needed help. We hadn't been told anyone was on such a super tight time crunch, otherwise we would have tried to be even faster about it. We hadn't meant to screw up anyone's day. When you come back from your lunch, I don't want you helping CO. Take out the garbage and come straight to relieve your covering teacher, AD says. Wow, all right. I nod and get back to my classroom. I explain the conversation to CO. She gets visibly upset about this. I think she may have talked to the director at that point, because a few days later, following the new law of diaper pail garbage disposal, not helping a single soul even when asked, coming back 5 minutes late still for every lunch, every day, we get a call to our classroom phone one morning. CO answers it. When she gets off, she's grinning. That was AD. We can start throwing the bags in our classroom trash bin again. Our method is just inconveniencing them too much and taking too much extra time. Oh Lord, I had a good laugh. And this was months ago. From then until the day I left, we never got the new diaper pails that would alleviate the entire problem. Funny how suddenly a biohazard isn't a problem when the solution will cost them time and money.
Click my next crazy HOA Karen compilation on your screen to continue your listening session. Thanks for checking this one out, and see you in the next one.